Discussion about working with maps. It doesn't necessarily have to be maps, but we're just kind of talking about extra large scale, kind of zoomed out drawings, some of the graphic strategies and representation moves that you might want to make with these kinds of drawings. A lot of the tips in here are going to probably apply to almost any style of drawing that you're working on. It's really just kind of like ways of thinking about what you're choosing to represent and how you're choosing to represent it. But the key takeaway is that maps are all made up. Drawings are all constructions. The map is not the territory is a quote from some old philosopher dude, I don't remember. But essentially, you can never represent something perfectly one-to-one. You always have to assume there's some kind of piece lost in translation from one into the other. So that's a challenge in that we can never represent anything perfectly. It's also an opportunity. You can kind of really hone and shape what you're trying to say with the drawings that you're doing. So first thing you always want to focus on with any kind of drawing, map in particular, is what story are you telling? What are you trying to say with this particular drawing? I think that's good advice for any set of drawings you're going to pin up on the wall, any set of construction drawings you're going to work toward in your career. You always have to kind of reverse engineer, okay, what is this specific drawing going to be saying or pointing people toward? You never want to just like do something to check it off a list. You might have your studio instructors give you a checklist of deliverables. That's very flexible depending on your project, even if they say it's not. You should always tailor what you're producing to the story that you're going to walk people through as you are talking about your work or sharing your work. So a good kind of rule of thumb is everything on your drawings should be either supporting something you're actively talking about or like calling it out actively so you can point at it and be like, I want to talk about A, B, and C, or kind of quietly in the background supporting a broader idea or narrative that you're trying to construct. We'll dig into that a little bit more. The second thing to keep in mind is that the information that you're working with, specifically working with spatial data, as we're going to be doing for this assignment, it's never neutral. It's always been collected by someone. That may be changing as it's now maybe collected by more computers than people, but still, same rule applies. Always interrogate, where's this data coming from? How old is it? Is it totally out of date? What is it missing? Who was the last person to change it or touch it? Did a computer do it? Do you trust that computer? So you always have to kind of take a little bit of a critical eye on the information that you're bringing in. Hopefully for while you're in school, this isn't too much of a concern, but just something to be super critical of. I think it's wise to be cautious and careful about information when it has important ramifications. So when you're working on presentation drawings, the precision of a contour line doesn't matter. No one's going to call you on it if it's not perfect. You can have really loose gestural interpretations of things as long as it's speaking to what you're saying. In the working world, if you're doing construction drawings, you're trying to figure out the topography that your building is sitting on. It's so important that you have accurate spatial information. I've seen projects where the survey data from your geotech consultant comes in and maybe an intern imports it slightly wrong. And then 6 months later, the building grades aren't where they should be, and it's like millions of dollars in fixing and retroactively messing with things. So mistakes early on or misconstrued data early on in a process that has real consequences, very important, very much worth spending your time tapping somebody on the shoulder for help when you're importing kind of survey very specific data. While you're in school, not the end of the world. Don't fret about the precision of the information that you're working with. It's really not super life or death at this point. Nothing in architecture is ever life or death for the most part, but people might want to make you feel like it is. And then what should you show and what can you remove? So a map or a drawing like this is ultimately kind of a collage. You are stitching together inputs from different sources to make this kind of quilt of information about what you want to talk about. I think the impulse often is to add in everything that you can find, kind of like throw everything into the pasta sauce and then see what comes out. And a lot of the time that kind of waters down what you're trying to say or makes it harder for people to engage or read what you're looking at. A lot of times these drawings can be really tough to engage with if you're not familiar with the content. It might make sense to you because you've been stitching it together by hand, but to somebody coming in fresh, it's always good to do them the service of trimming out anything that's not helpful to them when they're looking at it, that's not kind of telling the story that you want to tell or helping them build a picture in their mind of what you're talking about. Extra information can be quite harmful, and the hardest part of making drawings is often the editing process or learning what to cut or leave out of the frame. And so it's really important to remember that every single map makes a claim about the world. It kind of has a position on what exists, what doesn't exist, and a lot of the time the drawings that you're making have these kind of implicit underlying statements about what's real and what's not real. Again, no map is real. No representation of a thing is ever equal to the thing. It's always missing something. But you're choosing what to include and what to exclude with every single drawing that you make. And there's underlying complications and machinations of power underneath that, very old roots in colonialism and imperialism, all that good stuff. So redlining maps from the early 1800s, 1900s, still have effects on cities today in terms of the boundaries that people relatively arbitrarily drew around communities of color versus white communities that then changed who was able to get a mortgage. And that has had massive implications for the shape of cities and the lives and health of people for decades and decades. So maps aren't neutral. They're always working to tell some sort of story. And it's good to interrogate whose story and why. There's a dude, Edward Tufte. I think I brought one of his books. And you'll hear his name come up a lot for any sort of representation of information or data. He's got this book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. That's kind of a banger. I'll leave it here if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. But he's kind of the master of diagrams and information. And he's got a few kind of key tips and tricks that I found really helpful anytime you're making kind of any kind of drawing at the end of the day. He's got this idea of a data to ink ratio. And this is old school. This is when ink used to be something that we worked with when we printed things. Now it's kind of pixels to data ratio. And essentially what he's saying here, erase non-data ink, erase redundant data ink, revise and edit, is essentially every single line that you draw needs to have some sort of information associated with it. Wherever possible, every mark should mean something. Every line that you're drawing should hold a piece of information. An example is this little diagram of a bar chart on the left-hand side here, and then this kind of quartile plot on the right. They're both talking about the same thing and ultimately communicating the same information. One just uses significantly less quote-unquote ink or pixels to tell the exact same thing. So there's kind of always visual redundancy sometimes, and sometimes that redundancy is a good thing for clarity and ease of reading. Some people might prefer the bar chart on the left, but as a design strategy, trying to pare back things to the absolute minimum, how can you remove any sort of like extraneous moves or flourishes that can often help things become clearer, more straightforward, and tell a clearer story about what you're trying to say at a glance for people who aren't familiar with the information. So that's kind of what he's talking about with just stripping out anything that's redundant or not super essential. And this can be kind of a fun exercise for any drawings that you're doing. What can you erase or delete while still communicating the same information? So a lot of the time this means like extraneous use of color. Maybe you're using a ton of color and you don't need color, although we have a color allergy in architecture, which hopefully is starting to fade a little bit. Color isn't always a bad thing. I'm trying to internalize that a little bit better. Changing or leaving kind of these like default fingerprints of GIS software that aren't quite necessary to tell the story that you're trying to do. Base map clutter, so like labeling every single town or city or road or block isn't always necessary. Thinking about what is important for people to understand for what you're trying to say to them. Sometimes using really extra flourishes on your drawings can be quite distracting. Although everyone has personal style, and you don't always have to be super, super minimal with everything that you do, just as long as it kind of has a purpose and an intention. Most of the time, people tend to err on the side of like not using legends as much as they could, but sometimes people go over the top and include legends with their drawing that are just like way, way, way too much. But legends are kind of a helpful thing to keep in mind in the background. So somebody should be able to look at every single one of your drawings and understand what they're looking at without you verbally explaining what's going on. So as long as the drawings can kind of stand on their own, sometimes a little clean legend can help clarify different graphic strategies that you're using across the drawing without having to verbally explain it. And then you don't always need a north arrow. Sometimes it helps if you're twisting or rotating things, but for the most part, people are going to assume that north is up. Something else to keep in mind is scale. It's always really important to note in some fashion the scale of drawing that you're doing. While you're in school, it's probably fine to add in like a super minimal little scale bar, or just have like a written scale, like 1 to 6,000 or something. Those are usually fine to give people who are looking at it a clear idea of the scale that you're working at. When you are working in an office, it'll probably be much more specific, deliberate scales that'll be kind of denoted on construction drawings and that kind of thing. So just something to keep in mind. So some of the tools in your toolkit when you are putting together drawings, there are some kind of fundamental 7 strategies that you can play with or work with. Some of them I prefer to others, but everyone has their own kind of personal preference on what they think communicates their quote-unquote visual variables the best. There's a dude from the 60s, a French guy, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, who wrote a book, Sémiologie graphique, which is kind of a systematic theory of maps. And he came up with these kind of 7 different variables you can play with in a map or a drawing to make things super clear. And if you stick with these and don't use too many at the same time, you can really convey a ton of information with very few marks or moves. So position is kind of like an underlying given. It's not really something you're ever going to have to think about. It's just where stuff is on the map in space. That's kind of a given the data that you're working with. Size you can use as a tool to represent quantity or proportion. So maybe you have really big dots to talk about areas with lots of affected people, or maybe the size of a tree or that kind of thing. Value is underrated in my opinion. This is kind of lightness to darkness. So using just one color, having a range of from light to dark within that one color can communicate a ton of information about variable or sequential data. So if you have a lot of complex information, try adding in either opacity or lightness to darkness of the same color, and that can lend a really easy to read depth of information to what you're working with. Color can also be great. I really struggled with color. I always felt like I was really bad at it when I was in school. It's easy to put several colors together and end up with something kind of not ideal or tricky to read. But it is a great tool for distinguishing separate categories. It's a very quick, easy visual, like, okay, this is distinct from this, is distinct from this. But I would avoid using too many at the same time. Then that just kind of confuses the eye and makes it tougher to pull apart separate pieces. Texture is my girl. I really like texture. I think that it's underrated as a tool. I find myself using a lot of like hatches at different scales a lot, I find, because you can use the same color with different hatches or different orientations or densities of your hatches, and it can just look super clean and easy to read. It's quite intuitive from a distance. Just the like density of those lines can say a lot about quantity or density, that kind of thing. So hatches are great. Maybe we'll touch a little bit on working with hatches in Illustrator, because sometimes people get confused about how to scale line patterns and stuff. It can be kind of annoying. Orientation is also interesting. So this can work with texture. So maybe you change with the orientation of the hatch that you're using. That can be a strategy. It's basically just like the direction of the symbols that you're working with. It works best with things that are kind of lines that seem to point in a certain direction. So this can be like hashes or hatches or fills. And then shape. I find shape to be less effective. It takes a little bit more kind of cognitive effort, I think, for people to be like, okay, what does a circle mean? What does a square mean? What does a triangle mean? It's not super intuitive versus something that's like scalar, so like a hatch being super dense or super light. And so shape I kind of tend to use as a little bit of a last resort, but it can be great for calling out unique items or instances on a map that you're creating. Every mark should work hard. What does this mean? I don't remember. Okay, small multiples, the same drawing repeated across time, scale, or condition. I think maybe it was somebody had a question last class about, is it okay to have multiple maps next to each other with changes across the map to denote either different layers or changes across time? And the answer is always yes. Sometimes that can be a really great strategy to pull things up and separate them and put them side by side, or even kind of like toggle in between them. This can be a good strategy for working with GIFs and just having things kind of like flip through separate maps that by having the same background condition makes it really easy to compare and contrast, kind of like before, after, or like A, B, C, instead of trying to smash everything onto one drawing. So always up to you, but if you're feeling like things are really crowded and you're struggling to make sense of your drawing, pulling them into separate pieces can sometimes be a good strategy for you. When in doubt, I would just ask somebody around you to take a look and ask them what they're pulling out of the drawing that you're creating. Ask them if it makes sense to them, what they're reading. Just getting kind of like third-party feedback can be super helpful to pick up on things that you might not notice. Gray is a good color to get comfortable with. It's really, really great for things that are secondary to what you're focusing on in your map. So it's really good for context. So like maybe the outlines of buildings that you're interested in having in your map as kind of a context, but not the focus of what you're talking about. Maybe you're focused on a site. And so the information around it can be kind of grayed out. Gray also is super easy to read different range of hues. So lightness to darkness in grays can really signify importance. The darker something is, the easier it is to read at a distance. And so the more important it's going to register to people as they look at your drawings. Direct labels over legends. This one's kind of like, depends on what we're talking about here. But sometimes you'll see drawings. There's a lot of architectural drawings too, where maybe you'll see like a number on a floor plan and then the number corresponds to the name of the room or something. So it's like number 1 is bathroom, number 2 is bedroom. This can be really great for clarity of the drawing. It can make it look very, very beautiful and pretty. So if pretty is your priority, sometimes that can be a great strategy, like pulling the labels of things off to the side and then just having like a number or a letter to correspond to it. But if you're going for legibility and clarity, a lot of the time it's best to have the name of the thing directly on top of the thing, because it's just like a little bit of extra cognitive effort to go back and forth, and people aren't going to do it, and then they're going to ask you annoying questions in your review. So sometimes it's better to label things right smack on top instead of pulling them off to the side. And then compared to what, again, this is kind of like maybe more specific. If you're documenting changes in something, you're talking about something growing or changing over time, it's good to illustrate to people exactly what it's changing from. So maybe that's a little dashed line to talk about the initial outline or starting condition of a site, and then your drawing sits over top of that or underneath it. Just making sure that if you are referencing something changing, that you have kind of a visual representation of that starting point in some fashion. And then every mark should work twice. Have you guys seen this? I'm sure you've seen this drawing maybe last semester. Y'all have seen this. Okay, I won't beat it to death, but Mr. Tuft calls this drawing a specific banger. It says it's probably the best statistical graphic ever drawn, just because there's so many categories of information represented in one drawing. I'll leave this here if you want to dig into the details of it a little bit more, but it uses some interesting strategies like stroke width to connote things like population. So width of a line can have a lot of meaning in behind it. Color, time, moving from left to right and right to left. It's all very good and very interesting. The weight of those lines carrying meaning is something good to keep in mind as well. So as a general rule, if something is in the background or some context, you're probably going to want to keep it below 1/4 of a point in Illustrator. Just a good rule of thumb. Sometimes even lighter, and sometimes that line should be gray, not just straight black, if you want something to kind of fade into the background. Definitely keep it below this kind of 1/4 point threshold. 1/2 point to 0.75 point is getting a little bit bolder. These are sitting much more forward and starting to read as quite important in a map context. And then if you have anything that's 1 point or higher, that's going to read quite boldly. Again, depends the scale you're printing on, depends on if you're showing it on a screen or if you're physically printing something out. So definitely test the context that you're going to be showing your work in. But as a general rule of thumb, these are kind of some good like thresholds to keep in mind for when you're setting up drawings. And this applies to all kinds of drawings. I think I probably use similar stratas for like elevations or plans even. So like a cut line will be 1, and then anything sitting below the cut line will be less than 1/4 point. So don't forget to try out gray if things are still sitting too loud. I think if you want to make your drawings look sexy without much work, I think having a large and clear differentiation between the thickest lines and the thinnest lines is the easiest way to do that. So having like really thin, delicate, maybe light gray lines just makes drawings look like, oh wow, so considered. More amateur reading lines will tend to all feel quite flatter or closer together and typically a little bit too thick. So try playing around with nice light lines, but just make sure that they're still legible when you print them out. Something to consider is have you guys seen the Noli plan before? Yeah. So this is just like it's the quintessential figure ground map where all of the private space or buildings are blocked off in black. And then the white space in between is just all of the public space in the Roman city. So a great example of like, what are you talking about? What do you want to focus on? The heavy black fill of these shapes makes it really obvious what's accessible, what isn't accessible, and focuses on the public to private space in this specific context. So super interesting. Slide looks funny. I would highly recommend that you get comfortable in Illustrator when you are playing around with these kinds of things. If you're a wizard in GIS and you can change the symbology really well yourself, that's great. Sometimes I find that the exporting from GIS software, if you're using that, can get a little lost in translation. I don't know. It looks great on the screen in GIS, and then you print it to PDF, and it looks absolutely whack. So I trust Illustrator a little bit more, especially while you're in school. I think it's good practice to get quite fluent in Illustrator, so you're kind of like vomiting out your drawings in GIS or Rhino. Maybe they still look quite shitty, and then taking them into Illustrator and working with a clear kind of strategy to make things nice and clean. The best thing you can do in Illustrator is work with really clear layers. So you should, at minimum, probably have a background layer. So, or this could also be background. Maybe this is like thin line weights, thin/detailed. So this is going to be your like 0.25 and under. Your secondary line weights, so this is going to be your like mid-range kind of like context, but a little bit more important, so somewhere around like 0.5. And then primary line weights, so you need at least, I would say at least kind of 3 line weights for most drawings. Your thin, your medium, and then your heavy or thick, and that's going to be around like 1 point. You can add in additional ones, but it'll get harder to read the differences between them. So these are great categories to set up initially. Sometimes you might also want like an extra thin that's like 0.1 or gray. This is a really strong place to start. I like to set them up as separate layers in Illustrator so that you have them each existing on their own layer. You can select everything in a layer really quickly and easily and then change the settings for all of them at once. Color palette, it's smart to try to limit your color palette or be intentional about it at least. Typography, don't use too many crazy, wacky fonts. In general, a good rule of thumb is using just one typeface with 2 weights. So a thin one for talking about details and a thicker one for getting into it or highlighting something important. I don't think we'll get into graphic styles, so maybe I'll skip this one. And it's good to think about the scale of drawing that you're going to be making. So making sure that you're not going crazy gung-ho on details that aren't going to register at the scale at the drawing that you're producing. So wherever possible, try to think about how big your drawing is going to be at the end of the day and then work backwards from there to make sure you have the right level of detail and control there. There's some good reads at the back here, so there's some interesting references if you're keen on map making or representing information. So take a look at these if you're feeling keen or like you have free time for some reason. I'll pause there for a second. Does anybody have any questions about any of that yapping? Okay. Cool. So I think for the next little bit, it would be great to go around and take a look at what everyone's kind of thinking for their first assignment. Hopefully you've had a chance to grab some little screenshots or snips of data, things you're interested in, maybe some precedents. So I'll just go around the circle at random. Beep, boop, 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 bop. Let's start with Rizal. Is Rizal here? Yeah, hello. Would you be able to talk about what you're thinking, what we're looking at here?
So the project I'm looking for maplet is an undergrad project. It's basically like to create this model of housing for the homeless population, looking at abandoned parking structures that are elevated, kind of like adaptive reuse style.
Oh, cool.
So I've done a lot of in the undergrad, a lot of studies on like I guess that population. So I wanted to maybe do a socioeconomic gradient, focusing on downtown east side and downtown. Could be interesting to see like Yaletown versus downtown east side and Cole Harbor. So I already have some maps, like smaller maps of that. Also wanted to kind of map social like tent encampments, services for the homeless, and just different housing types. And possibly like map those like elevated parking structures as well. That's all I have so far.
Awesome. Did you make these?
No, that's like from a class like analysis we did.
Oh, okay. I was going to say this looks great. Good job. So this is a great graphic reference even to run with. I think this is an excellent use of color. Great example of using gray to kind of like block out space so it's really familiar and clear what we're looking at, and then the color really stands out against that quite like neutral background. So great reference. I think that's such an interesting lens to layer over top. I want to see that map personally. When you're looking at household income, so this kind of map, I've found that the you can get Stats Canada data. And there's all kinds of really interesting stuff in here in terms of like the socioeconomic brackets and stuff. I think the census from 2022 is probably the most recent like detailed piece of data on that. Maybe there's more specific Vancouver ones, but this could be a really cool resource to check out. The one thing I would note is that the scale at which a lot of that stuff is done, the smallest parcel size or like little chunks or areas that we can usually find, so like this kind of scale is called a dissemination block, and that's with the StatsCan census. So if you look for dissemination block, StatsCan dissemination block, this should point you in a good direction for kind of like a shapefile that'll give you boundaries that should have more specific data associated inside of it. So this might be a good place to look. Do you have a source of data that you're looking at already?
I'm mostly looking, I think it was Census 2022, that's most of where the data was from, so I'm just referring back to my previous site analysis for the most part, but yeah, I'll check that out.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, and feel free to just like trace this if you want to. That's fine too.
I did have a question, because I also, just added like a precedent at the bottom.
Mm.
I was wanting to add some kind of like photos maybe.
Wow.
To really kind of get into that, like the urban landscape of that area, and like show the contrast that tent encampments with like the high rise. Yeah, I'm wondering if that's too much like layering at that point, or is that okay?
That's a great question. This is such a pretty precedent. I love this. I think that's quite wise of an approach, especially for the subject matter that you're looking at. I think that's quite smart, because it is quite a like. It's one thing to look at a map. It's another thing to like see kind of viscerally the differences in living conditions between socioeconomic groups. So I think this is actually a great strategy for you. And I think it could work really well. Like, I think this is a great template for maybe the context or the background of the city fabric is super light and gray. The key here will just be like editing and simplification. So the black and white photos helps a lot. Like if these were color, it would read as like super crazy too much. So the black and white can be a strategy that you can look at for helping things like feel less overwhelming. And then the selective color can help to call out those sites that you're looking at or the differences in socioeconomic groups. So I think this is a great example of like flattening things down to a few strategies, really light background. The hues of the photos are stripped out, so it's super clean and easy to read, not too overwhelming. And then color is used really selectively. There's only one color in this image, which is kind of cool. I think colored images could work as well if the rest of the colors in the drawing are quite stripped back and minimal. But this could be a great strategy. I think that's an awesome precedent. Cool. Well done. Any comments or thoughts for Brazil? Okay, great. Very excited to see how that goes. Let's go clockwise. We'll go down to Arshia.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the one on the top left was like a quick sort of base map for like this studio project we're making right now, and essentially it had like this historic creek that ran through this site that's highlighted in red, and like there's like this interesting relationship between that historic creek and Shroud Lake in the bottom, and also False Creek to the top, and also how the historic extent of False Creek sort of like came really close to the site and sort of like intruded into the site. There's like that bottom picture, which is like the site in 1912 from Ben Maps.
Whoa, crazy.
Yeah, how like you
Is
have
this it?
the shoreline coming in there.
Wow.
Like, and then for my like sort of like I guess concept for the project, I want to see if there's a way where I can essentially like daylight this creek and maybe introduce some of that biodiversity that was once there in that area and sort of bring it to the site. So sort of going back and looking at the extent of False Creek and the creek that ran through the site, and maybe also mapping out some density of ecology that's there.
Awesome.
And for my graphic precedents, I was really thinking of, I don't know, maybe getting into like some textures and different ways of hatching and density to show different ground conditions and water conditions, and also using like maybe contrast to highlight key areas along the creek. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, that's really exciting. I think, I don't remember her name, but I'm gonna find someone's thesis from last year. It seems really relevant. She was looking at like daylighting a similar area, but I'm glad that you found the historic extent. I think that's a great layer to pull from. Is this the site, the China Creek, North Park? Oh, very cool. Yeah, this all used to be marsh, and it's industrial now, and all of the ground is really unstable. So super interesting project. I'm excited to see how that goes. I think this layer, if you can't find the shapefile, just like tracing it is worthwhile. This is really interesting. Like the historic map is quite cool. I wonder if you could translate it into something like this. But I think there's also, we might touch on this in another class, but if you're interested in ortho photos, like historical aerial imagery of the site, there's stuff going back to like the 30s, which might be interesting. But you have to go in person. It's the GIS lab. GIS systems. Maybe it's not that. UBC GIS. Anyway, they have this geospatial data. They have this massive repository of physical photographs from planes in the 30s that might be kind of cool to look into. We might talk about it at a later date, but I'll just flag that as something that could be cool. But I think this is a really cool strategy. I think the calling out areas of focus to draw your eye inward, and especially to talk about the bounds of where the creek used to be, could be a cool strategy. So like using this orange shape to map out like that higher contrast boundary could be super interesting. And yeah, I think this would be a really great use of texture, especially if you're looking more specifically at the ecologies on site. I think when you're looking at this broader city scale, maybe this is a two map situation. You've got one that's quite zoomed out and one that's zoomed in. I don't know if the city has amazing data on ecology or like especially historical ecology, so that might be more of like a site observation situation, but I think this sounds really great. Any questions or comments for Arsha? Looks good. Okay, nice job. All right, is Miss Lulu here?
Yeah. So for the up to maps are two presidents I got from a map book. And for my map, I pretty much want to lay out the cities or the countries that I have been to in the past.
Oh, cool.
But I don't know if this is over, is it too big? It's still too big.
No, not at all.
Because I've never been to Russia and North and South Pole and Australia, like those parts can be deleted. So, but this is pretty much, I want to lay out including the path of the flight and to make it a chronological order, listed down the date and reason that why I was there, and also to visually draw out the starting point and the end point, and from that city where did I go afterward. So this is pretty much a path that you can follow. And also for this, in the square bubbles around this map, it can be map of each city. I don't know if that's too much work, but initially thought that would be the map of each city I've been to or places I've been to, to just put them down graphically. So this is a rough idea.
Cool. Yeah, that's really exciting. I like the I'm glad you're finding precedents in books. That makes me really happy. I'm glad you're reading books. I think this is a fun kind of precedent. I wonder if similar to, because you're talking about like a path or a sequence, and sometimes that can be hard to illustrate starting points, ending points, and like direction of lines when you're talking about paths or flights. I wonder if the line itself could have like a direction to it. Like maybe there's there's arrows inside of the line to help your eye kind of move through and figure out kind of what came first, what came second. Maybe the line like changes colors so you can kind of like follow as you move from one place to the next. So thinking about strategies to help guide, otherwise instead of all of the lines just being flat and one color or weight, helping guide people through the sequence or story is really cool. I think pulling off little context maps could be really interesting too. You can map like where you went in the city. This is a great exercise in editing, so I think removing out anything that's not important, like, is the map of the world super critical, or do you just need those points in space kind of like relative to each other, to talk about how you've traveled from one to the other? Because you didn't really experience the spaces in between, so maybe those aren't relevant to draw. And then what are you interested in the cities? Maybe it's this kind of like Noli map, really straightforward. Hopefully that's not too much work. I think you might be able to find some kind of maps of cities that you can make consistent and homogeneous across them. Not too bad. And then I like this little sketch that you have down at the bottom of these little guys. This is you as you get older. I like that a lot. That's quite cool. So maybe this can kind of act as a legend for like how to read the path across the map and the globe. Very cool. And I'm excited to hear more about where you've been. Looks like you've been a lot of really cool places. That'll be really neat. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. Very cool. Any comments for Lulu? These references are great. If any of you have flown this much, I have questions. But very cool map. All right, Miss Charlotte.
This is just kind of more of an idea. I don't really have that many references, but it's just I wanted to see like what the views are from like the movie where I did my project, and then be able to map that out visually, just like what levels, like what heights you can see, and yeah, like maybe put pictures in it in a clever way. I'm not quite sure how.
Yeah.
And then I was trying to like kind of do it as if like it was being scanned or like seen from left to right, but it didn't work super well. Yeah.
Cool. I get it. I see the vision. That's a tough. I feel like I've tried to do similar drawings at similar points, and I think I wonder if this is a situation where like you actually make several little smaller key maps, and then the images are like kind of the big thing. Like the focus is on maybe a grid or maybe this like panorama of views, and then there's a little key map that kind of indicates where you're looking. Yeah, you got a thought?
I'm curious if you can like take the edges of the fan where the view lines are cut off, and from there make like a strip collage. Have you seen the ones where they take photographs of the street and it's a cutout, but it follows instead the kind of strip along the lines? And then you don't even need the context necessarily. It would just be really cool to see the edge of the view line and plan while also seeing the elevation as you look around. Does that make sense?
I love that suggestion, actually. I think that's really cool. So you're kind of like tracing the edge,
Yeah,
and then
the
there's
photos stick kind of like that around of the blocks,
yeah, I love that. I think that could be super fun too. It's like really intuitive way to read, and if you're having trouble layering too many things on one drawing, maybe this is like several copies of this at different points, but that's really fun.
You can also do like one big one zoomed out and then do like little segments.
Yeah.
You see like it's more blown up so you see better.
Yeah, for sure. I think using the photographs is the way to go, though, I think, for sure. Instead of like an abstract plan view, the experiential view. I'd probably leave them in color unless you're just interested in like the formal shape or blocking out. But color panorama style, tracing the edges could be super, super cool. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Any other thoughts from Ms. Charlotte? Cool. So this one probably takes less like GIS intensive stuff. Lucky for you. Nice. But let me know if you have any like Photoshop questions or Illustrator stuff. Cool. All right, Ethan. Cool precedents.
So the ones on the right are my precedents. So I want to like kind of do mixed media using hand drawings and digital work. And then for I have the two ideas, either to make like a site analysis of my previous project in or last semester studio, or to do this one. So I have another one I haven't scanned this, but I don't know if I should pin it up.
Sure, yeah. if you don't mind. Here, I can open it.
But yeah, I was thinking like to use to kind of like incorporate all my qualitative observations
wow.
into the drawing.
Right.
So there's some like quantitative stuff like trees, topography, whatever, but then also like incorporating like my sort of experiential observations. So kind of like putting that. So this is like the kind of like the view different physics. But yeah, essentially like using this as like the base and digitizing it.
Wow. Everybody should come take a look at this if you haven't seen it yet. Stunning hand drawing.
And then like this rhino stuff here, I was just exploring different ways to represent topography. I thought like the meshes looked really cool, so I was like essentially like overlaying a mesh and then like just like changing the different draping and then changing like the different like intensities to create different patterns. So like
Oh,
this is,
cool.
like, the one I'm pointing at, like I really like this one because you can start to see like sort of like patterns that exist. So anyways, those are just kind of
Very cool. Obviously your hand drawing skills are incredible, so I won't touch on those too much. I'd encourage you to carry that through your work. I know you probably want to expand your digital drawing skills as well, but the fundamentals that you have are so compelling. I think if you can, I know it's hard, but if you can kind of like carry that forward through your schooling, I think that's such a strong
I think that
visual.
is like a lot of what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think yeah.
I think I don't remember if this is a Neil Spiller drawing or not, but are you familiar with Neil Spiller?
No.
Oh, okay, you might love his work. Very similar, kind of like lots of layers of manual, digital, and mixing even like physical models with drawings that are super interesting. So it's got lots of cool writing. Architecture and surrealism is really good too. So that could be a dude to look at, but I think your precedents are super strong. You've got the stunning hand-drawn map as a base, which is fantastic. I really like the way that you're pulling off the sections or elevations of the site into the four edges. Like the way that you're pulling them off is a great way to record those qualitative observations. I think how you choose to use color, it looks like you have a strong grasp on that already, will be a really interesting strategy. It'll be kind of a balance between annotating those edges, like those pulled off sections, versus maybe where they exist on the plan. So just making sure that you can kind of like tie back those elements from the pulled off sections or elevations and make it clear where those exist on the site in plan. I think that's going to be super rich and beautiful. And I think the mesh information is really interesting. I think it's super compelling because it talks about the information that you have available, like the density of the mesh speaks to the density of like the points or contours that were available to you at that time, which is kind of fascinating. It's maybe secondary to everything that's going on, but it could be a really cool overlay that just kind of speaks about like, this is what I have available and this is the bizarre kind of digital artifacts that come out of it. So these are really interesting. This is crazy. It's super cool mesh. But I think ultimately using the drawing and thinking about it as something you can carry through the rest of the semester is great too. So thinking about how maybe things are done in layers that you can turn on or off depending on how your design strategy moves through the semester would probably be my best advice. But I think you have a really clear graphic approach and visual, and then I think just illustrating those pulled off sections, the graphic language you choose to use for those will be really interesting. Maybe the plan drawing remains this kind of more clear, calm line work, and then the things that you're pulling off of it are more lively and explosive kind of use of color. But yeah, I don't have much commentary other than I'm really excited to see where you go with it. I think it's a great concept, and the things you're doing already are great. Anybody have any thoughts for Ethan? Yeah.
The piece by Barry Cutler, that one, the colorful one. I actually DM'd him on Instagram because I wanted to ask him about his process, because a lot of his work is speculative and really abstract, and that's why I'm asking him about kind of how he approaches that. And I think it'd be cool if you wanted to just talk to him. He's really responsive on Instagram.
Really?
Yeah, and he's really enthusiastic about helping people. And he has a bunch of talks and stuff that are really insightful regarding these kinds of pieces. So I think everyone here can look on his Instagram and see just how beautiful. Slight enthusiasm, yeah. I just thought that was pretty cool.
That's incredible. That's really cool. I mean, kudos for being brave and doing that, because that's awesome. I think actually people are more willing to talk to other people than you would think, and so taking the initiative to ask for advice is amazing. That's really, really cool. Did he have any bangers? Any tips and tricks you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at the conversations, but he's so wise.
Oh,
It's really cool. Yeah.
that's awesome. Okay, amazing. I won't make you post screenshots, but
He teaches at Eileen Initiative.
incredible. Okay. Maybe our last assignment will be sliding into the DMs of someone you respect graphically. That's awesome. Thanks so much. Any other thoughts for Ethan? Any other people who should slide into their DMs? Excellent. Okay, we'll move on to Eden.
So for my math, our students this semester asked me to design virtual lobby and before and Q&A. So I was looking at the TypeScript flow and different user groups who's passing through and who's staying and how how they're pass overlap at different times. And I also interested in how these layers of movement shape those actual experiences. And I also include some the rainbows map and some map diagram about temperature, but I think is that too much to include in this map?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on how your observations go. I think a lot of the time maps like these get produced based on kind of intuition, or I think maybe this is what happens. But if you can actually go to the site and watch what's happening, that adds a ton of richness. Maybe there is correlation to these things. Maybe you're finding that people avoid an edge of the street because the wind is really strong in that direction. So I would probably try to do the observation first and then see if there's any patterns that kind of match up with these overlays that you found. Maybe you go back a couple times and on a cold day, people move in a certain pattern or there's nobody there and it's totally dead, versus different rainy conditions, sunny conditions. Actually observing and mapping those things could be super valuable. If you don't have time to do that, that's okay. Maybe there is an aerial map you could get or a photograph of the site that indicates kind of maybe the grass is worn in superpositions, and you can kind of identify where people might start to be and then make some inferences or layers from that. But if you do manage to go to the site, I think it could be really cool You've got a few photograph examples in here. Could be great to use photos from the site to, again, just kind of reinforce, like, I went here, I looked at it, I promise, because we do see a lot of kind of like, this is probably where people go, and it's like, do you know that? But if you have the evidence of, like, I was there, this is what it's like, that adds a lot to people looking at the map. There's a level of trust, like, okay, I trust that you went there, I trust that these are what the conditions feel like. So I think photographs could be a great way to incorporate that. You've got some interesting stuff here with these kind of like transects that could be quite cool. So looking at the different paths across the site, maybe kind of similar to Charlotte's, maybe you have photographs of people moving across that kind of follow the pathway across, if that's what people are sticking to. Could be kind of an interesting approach. And then this precedent here is quite interesting as well, where maybe if people aren't sticking to the paths, you can use this kind of like gridded system to explore what areas of the site are drawing people, and that might help to layer on information over top, or especially with these photographs. But yeah, I think that's a really rich place to start and a great scale. This diagrammatic approach could be cool too. If you don't want to use photographs, you can kind of have illustrations of things that you've witnessed or anticipate happening. But yeah, I think the precedents are really strong, and looking at this kind of like path following or like little transect approach, I think could be super cool and interesting. Any comments or thoughts for Eden? Yeah.
It seems like Eden's is responsible with the pedestrian for the map, but I feel like Eaton is not for my final recommendation. If there are the vehicular path and also bicycle path and bus stops are included in this map, so that would be wonderful transportation map for our final.
That's a great point. Starting to think about other modes you can layer in, maybe thinking about, like, maybe if this map is more zoomed into the site, you can start to think about ways that you could represent it at that broader scale as well. Like maybe it's kind of like fitted in like a puzzle piece into a larger map that illustrates those connections and movements. And similar to Ethan's, I think thinking about how you could carry through the semester with those things, that's a really great point. Is like, is there other forms that are speaking to the same thing? Like maybe there's a lot of dudes on those scooters, like e-scooters, and then that defines your whole drawing at the end of the day. But being open to like what exists there, I think is probably the way to go. That's a really great point. Any other thoughts for Eden? Yeah. That's a great point. Do you remember what it's called? It's like street traffic something. Traffic movement counts might be this one, directional traffic count locations. These could be cool things to take a look at. Let me see if they are what I remember. That's a great point though. So there is little intersections, and then each one should have data corresponding to how many vehicles and bikes that they're counting. So super interesting. Okay, that's great. Nicholas, let's take a look.
I was just posting some random stuff.
Cool, random stuff. I like it.
So I was interested in exploring this, like, or I wanted to show like this area, it's like this place to
Mm.
and then here I have examples of like my diagrams and a few examples of diagrams that I made in the past.
Oh my god. Are you okay? These are like Lacanian desire and stuff?
Oh yeah, I had a
Wow.
class on Lacan and I asked the prof if instead of an essay I could make a diagram. So I made a diagram.
That's incredible. Okay. I love that. Did you pass?
Yeah, no, I got
Good.
it.
Incredible. Yeah, Lacan has so many diagrams, and I try to read the text. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? What's he talking
Well,
about?
because
So,
yeah, I felt like when she was explaining the diagrams, it's like, oh, okay, I get it, like the trifold knot and whatever. So it's like, okay.
I'm gonna get you to explain that to me later because I still don't get it. That's awesome.
So yeah, I have an attraction to diagrams, and I was trying to figure out everything she was explaining to us, and like putting it into like a spatial thing.
Hmm.
And then, but this is the one which I wanted to like. I was interested in integrating it into like an actual like map because I felt like the way that like this kind of abstract idea of like destruction, whatever it isn't like, or like what is sustainable isn't like just a single point, and then what is like not sustainable is like at the fringes of it. I feel like it's more than that. It's possible to jump from one mode of something sustainable to like another mode of that.
Oh, interesting.
So I was thinking like through maybe an area of instability or something, right? And so I wanted to show that, like, I wanted to map that somehow. I don't know exactly how yet. Onto like a map of like an actual like place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't really know how to use softwares that much. I was playing around with Rhino, and so I was like trying to compose a 2D image with the like lights and whatever. And this is what I came up with, but it isn't clear at all. It looks interesting, but it's fun. But
You made this in Rhino?
yeah.
I'll ask again. Are you okay?
Yeah, maybe not.
This is kind of incredible. I don't know. Did you use like a water texture in Rhino on some of the surfaces?
No, I made it so on the image above, you see the curved shape underneath?
Yeah.
That's, I made it in copper and then gave it like a bumpy texture.
Oh my god.
And then it's like, I guess that's in the rendering, it like reflects it like kind of like a watery kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is what I wanted. I don't know if it's exactly the right texture for it, or if I could change the texture to actually be like water. But
That's so interesting. I kind of love this. I don't know. I think it's so great as a piece of art. It's really wonderful. I see where you're coming from. I think it's obviously like not super legible to people who aren't.
no, it isn't legible.
I don't know if that matters in this particular case because you're talking about something so intense and like abstract to some degree. I wonder if like moving forward you keep pushing it in this abstraction zone, or if you try to bring it into a world of legibility. I don't know if legibility will like kill the life in it, maybe.
I think that, like the concepts are like if I make it more legible over time with 2 iterations, it's a good thing because then I can better share like something that
Yeah.
I'm thinking about and get someone else's opinion on it.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. It's interesting to me that you are drawn to water bodies, and because like sailing maps, and are you a sailor?
A little bit. I enjoy it. I enjoy saying.
Amazing.
I'm not like a person who races.
That's okay. If you have the language of like reading title charts and stuff, I think that's okay. I don't either. That is a whole other
It
language.
would be cool. I want to learn.
Yeah.
Eventually, I'm just not there yet.
But that could be an interesting like visual reference for you to pull from to talk about these moves. Like I know right now you're representing them as hermetic objects that kind of move from one to the other. I wonder if they're more these kind of like liquid flows from one state to another. Maybe that's the opposite of what you're saying, but I don't understand. Maybe I'll understand someday. But everything is like a process as it changes from one to another, and like are those in between states more fluid, like these like tidal charts that you're layering on top of? I'm not gonna pretend I understand God is both a tyrant and a purely creationary being. I love it. I love the direction that you're moving. I wonder if this diagram comes back in some sort of way, like maybe text helps people like me to understand a little bit better. Especially like Lacan is all of his diagrams are textual at the end of the day, as much as they are kind of like symbols. Maybe some of the text from here comes back. A map can be a map of text and like a diagram of text flowing from one to the other. So this has been stripped down to such an interesting degree. I wonder if it's kind of like a bringing back of some of those layers of information. What are these?
Text. You can read it. That I just put in like about myself, like a little blurb about myself, because I was thinking, I could put this on my website. But it's like Nicholas envisions a.
I see it.
You know, I don't know what it would say here. It's actually hard to read. I'm not gonna lie.
Is this a font?
Yeah, it's a font. I made my own font.
What?
So the idea is that I can encode anything into like a grid of like these 7 dots, right?
Right.
And then like, so yeah, so it's legible, but it's hard to read. Kind of like I was inspired by the A typography people.
Right. That's so interesting. You're a fascinating character, Nicholas. What a wonderful drawing. Very cool. I love like little almost inside jokes with yourself. Like, you can read this. I'm not sure many other people can. I see your name. I see Nicholas here, and then I'm like, okay, I'm done. But I think there's something really fun about like this having meaning that's only legible to you. I think that's really great.
Yeah, I guess if I would maybe tailor the spacing, I don't know how to do it in Rhino, but I would want it, if I could somehow have the spacing nice and like between the letters and so on, so that's clear where each line starts and ends. Maybe it would be a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could take a look at it
After
and
one or two really different programs.
yeah. We could look at it in Grasshopper too. Like, we could build this and look at but that's a story for another day. Anyways, I'm so confused and I love it very much. I think the way that you're layering in rendering in Rhino is really fun and cool. I wonder if playing with the texture a little bit more, like making your own bump maps in Photoshop, you can kind of like paint bump maps essentially. So like how much things are pushing up versus moving down in these kind of rendered images. Bump displacement maps, Photoshop. Maybe this could be something that you play around with. Like maybe the map that you make is like a bump map, and then that renders out as something interesting.
Okay.
Because the text, the font that you've made is kind of has this fun like braille effect almost. There's this like pushing and pulling that's really interesting. There's a artist who did, I think I have it on my desk. This is like a photograph that they shattered into like 100 different planes in something like Rhino. So they have like a photo, and then they have all of these planes that they then like shattered it onto in Rhino space, which is really interesting. So projecting images onto those bump maps could be cool. I don't have too much more advice for you other than I really appreciate the experimentation. I think it's very cool. I'm excited to see where you go with it. I would play with the bump maps, the texture of the water, and maybe adding in some layers of text annotation in this font, or maybe in your personal font, to explore. Even just this as a graphic is really interesting and cool, and I want to learn more about it. I think maybe a little more annotation would be helpful, but they stand on their own as like really compelling visual objects. Does anybody have any thoughts for Nicholas? I feel like I'm in another realm, and I don't have much advice for you.
I just think it's sick.
Yeah, I think it's sick.
Consolidated rhino is actually sick.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you should look at it if you don't know how to read. And I'm not saying this because I like believe in what they write about necessarily, but CCRU, like I can tell you this, right? It's like their whole philosophy is like based off of these like weird random diagrams, and they use like this really cryptic language. Talk about like typing accelerationism.
Oh, okay.
And like the visual language is like kind of similar and like a little bit creepy and like body horror-esque, you know. Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah,
Okay.
it's cool. It's cool, but it's also like it gets into this like weird like right-wing acceleration where like human beings and technology should be one. It's like it's weird, but aesthetically very tight, I think. So there's that.
Why do the accelerationists have a superior aesthetic? I don't like
I
it.
mean, this specifically came out of like a school in the UK in the 90s, like this group of guys and one girl, and then they kind of like split off, and this one guy named Ryan like turned like super right wing, like all.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like give it a read. You can never like it's a mind mess. Like, yeah. Yeah. But it's what it reminds you of.
Yeah, probably inspired by like I don't know, various like esoteric things if that's the case.
Okay, I also have another one for you.
Yes.
It's called Revolutionary Demonology. It's an Italian group. It's all like the same publisher. And like there's yeah, there's these like crazy quotes. I think this one it's like every worm trampled is a star. It's like what does that mean? But it's and there's like nothing on them. They're like this Milan group or something. I don't know. It's yeah. It's like yeah. I don't even know what you would categorize it as, but it reminds me of you, and I think that's small enough. Yeah.
That's it.
You guys are so interesting. I love it.
I was also shown this artist. He's not in this class, but yeah, he showed me this guy called Walter Russell, who also makes really good art. So I've been browsing.
Oh, let's go.
It's like the 1920s or something. So like trying to like show like how atoms work and like all kinds of like electromagnetic fields and like these graphic things.
That's so great.
And apparently, the story is that he was able to predict like a certain like atomic weights through one of his diagrams apparently,
Wow.
which I thought was pretty cool.
That's incredible. I think also, if you're looking for like representational, even like Hilma Af Klint's Atoms series is kind of interesting.
Yes, I feel like that's like my initial inspiration.
Is it?
Like a long time ago.
Cool. It's in there.
It's in there, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's super interesting work. I think I don't know if this came to her in dreams or it was like a seance or something, but she's that's really interesting. I love that. Okay, we are running out of time. I'm so sorry. So maybe we'll pick up the other half of class on Friday and dig into Grasshopper a little bit, but I'll stick around if anybody has any pressing questions or concerns they want to get off their chest about this assignment. Thank you so much for sharing your work in progress. I'm very excited about the direction things are going and about reading some freaky accelerationist literature in the near future. But have a great week, and I'll see you guys on Friday.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.